Tourneys and clubs, oh my. Leagues, tourneys, and clubs, oh my. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline, April 2023. For our feature story, the North American diplomacy hobby has enjoyed the presence of its defining event, DipCon, since 1966. At first, DipCon was just a friendly gathering of hobbyists without a competitive tournament as its focus. But every DipCon since 1970, except for 71, has also served as the North American Diplomacy Championship. The success of DipCon as the crowning jewel of the continent's tournament circuit was noticed elsewhere, with the idea of a championship event rotating its location around regional tournaments being emulated with the advent of World DipCon in 1988 and Euro DipCon in 1993. This year's DipCon is to be held in about a month in conjunction with the 37th Annual DixieCon in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Later in this program, we'll reminisce about DipCon, DixieCon, and other con memories with a panel of champions. But first, we look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. Diplomacy League action is off and running, with the Virtual Diplomacy League holding its first game day back in mid-March. And quite a start it was, with 6 games over 3 rounds, each one differing substantially from the others. Currently leading the 2023 season is California resident Jackson Roberts, with a 16-center dominating board top as Russia. But Israel's Roni Mordvanov and Australia's Peter McNamara are not too far behind in second and third. The VDL careens into its second game day on April 29th. If you have not yet tried Virtual Diplomacy, which is a live game played on Backstabber with audio negotiation through the VWDC Discord server, then this league could be a good place for you to start. Below are links to the VDL website, as well as to our DBN coverage of the March Games broadcast that we did live on March the 11th. Speaking of diplomacy leagues, the Virtual Tour of Britain event also launched its 2023 season in March, with currently reigning monarch Timothy Crosby of Florida off to a nice start in the defense of his crown. There are 7 more rounds left of the tour, with the next one to take place 4 p.m. UK time on Sunday, April 23rd. You can read Tournament Director Gary Sturley's description of this league at the website linked below. For your chance to play in the tour itself, join the VWDC Discord server using the invite link below and navigate your way to the Tour of Britain role. The tour games will likely be featured in the next edition of DBN's League Night broadcast coming up on April 29th, right here on this same YouTube channel. All right, we've now mentioned face-to-face tournaments and virtual leagues, so let's segue into the third major way that our game is played, online play, sometimes called extended deadline. The Nexus server on Discord has a new season final being played right now, Season 8 of this tournament, featuring play on all of the major diplomacy websites and Android apps. The 7 finalists for this game are Kunal as Turkey, Tanjian as Russia, Jackson Roberts in Italy, Riaz Varani as the Austrian, Europe playing Germany, Coke Animal as England, and Tarsier as France. At the time of this recording, the game has progressed into spring 1905 with a forceful stab by Riaz of his up-to-then Russian ally. Each move of this game is being covered as usual on Ed Sullivan's YouTube channel called The Diplomats, a link to which is provided below. Check out he and his fellow commentators' keen analysis of the game itself, the personalities involved, and the Nexus event as a whole. In club news, the Association of Rocky Mountain Area Diplomacy Adversaries, or ARMADA, continues to host regular club games in and around the Denver, Colorado area. On the group's Facebook page, you can see game reports complete with photos of the top finishers for games going back now for several years. They also use their page to organize new game days and to promote Armada's face-to-face tournament, which is called the Regatta, an event which has hosted both World DipCon and DipCon in the past. The 2023 version of the Regatta is scheduled for July 14th through 16th at the Doubletree in Greenwood Village, Colorado. For more information on Armada's club play and upcoming tournament, visit the links provided below. Speaking of tournament news, the latest event in the North American circuit was just completed in San Jose, California, with Washington State's Chill Matthew Krill coming out on top as the winner of the 2023 whipping tournament by about half a point over his Russian ally to Krill's Austria in that last round. Matthew had scored a dominating board top as Turkey in round one of the event. Put on annually by the Bay Area Diplomacy Association, the tournament fielded a strong cohort of players from around the world of diplomacy, with the Doctor of Death, Craig Mayer of Montana, taking second, and Nicolas No-Effin-Way Sahuguet of Quebec coming in the third position. You can catch the Diplomacy Broadcast Network coverage of this event at the link provided below. Don't forget 3 other events coming up. The San Marino National Diplomacy Convention, sponsored by the Italian Diplomacy Association, which is in early May. The North American DipCon, I've already mentioned, at the end of May in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And the 2023 World DipCon, scheduled for August in Bangkok, Thailand. Links to all of these events are also provided below. Now, let's take a trip around the world of YouTube channels and other diplomacy content creators to report to you on the latest and greatest new diplomacy products from whom we call our DBN media partners. The DiploStrats YouTube channel, run by 2022 Ambassador of the Year Marcus Zylstra, and also featuring color commentary from Marcus Edholm, has just released a unique game commentary for our hobby, focusing on the game of diplomacy, which serves as the backdrop for the only known Frozen/diplomacy fan fiction in existence. Yes, boys and girls, you can watch as Anna and Elsa team up early as France and England, while Olaf snows the East as Italy, or something like that. The link to this video is provided below. FloridaMan has also released new content on his YouTube channel, including a series of videos on a recent game of the variant War in the Americas, played on Play Diplomacy, as well as a highly entertaining debate about online diplomacy versus the face-to-face version, featuring the new-ish personalities of Gator Guy and Orlando Man. Yeah, you pretty much have to see this video to actually believe it. So the link to FloridaMan's YouTube channel can be found below. Possibly the only thing better than a fun game of diplomacy between 7 of DBN's on-air personalities would be such a game played as a fundraiser for 7 different charities. Well, we did that back in March with the second ever Broadcasters Brawl. The 2023 version of this fundraising event featured the Italy of Michalis Camariti's besting a field, which also included Ed Sullivan, Zachary Moore, Robert Schuppe, Kevin O'Kelly, Tanya Gill, and Karthik Kanath. More importantly, the hobby raised over $6,000 for a very deserving set of charities and had a lot of fun with guest commentators joining the normal broadcast crew to analyze the shenanigans of these players. If you did not catch the live broadcast, a link to our DBN video is provided below. Now, after hearing about all the leagues and tournaments I've already described in this broadcast, you may be thinking that the world of diplomacy has a lot going on these days in terms of organized opportunities to play this bloody game, and you'd be right. And yet, count me among those who will always believe there is room for more. Another fellow who thinks that way is British hobbyist Malarkey, who recently announced on his website Diplomaticon that there are now 9, count them 9, new dip leagues either started or in the process of starting, a group of leagues he's calling the Online Diplomacy Leagues. Each of Play Diplomacy, Web Diplomacy, and Backstabber will have 3 active leagues, so one each of Full Press Play, Gunboat Play, and Speedboat Play. The Press and Gunboat leagues will feature a number of preliminary rounds with the top 7 to advance to a championship game for each website. And the Speedboat League instead will feature a number of rounds scored together to determine the league championship. For more information, visit the link to the Diplomaticon website provided below. And now for something completely different. Are you worried about how Twitter has kind of imploded? And frankly, even before that happened, Twitter was kind of ruining people who were on it, particularly media and political types. Well, according to the online magazine Vice, diplomacy is, and I quote, the impossibly nerdy online game that's fixing the brains of media Twitter, unquote. Author Anna Merlin reports that a group of 30 to 35 journalists are playing a 24-player worldwide variant over and over on what they have affectionately called Diplomaslack, i.e., diplomacy on the business messaging app Slack. You really have to read the whole article to appreciate all that's going on here, but I do want to tempt you with one of the great quotes of this Diplomacy Month from a diplomacy player and journalist, Brendan O'Connor, frustrated by dealing with fellow players not doing what he wants them to do. And again, I quote, every time this happens, I think I'm done with this whole thing because it's stupid and boring, and I hate it when people don't listen to me. And then a couple of days pass, and I'm looking forward to the next game. It's a sickness, end quote. Welcome to sick bay, Brendan. Get comfortable, man. I hope you're going to be here sick like us for a very long time. And now it's time for a segment which we call My Favorite Things, in which we interview a diplomacy hobbyist about their passion or interest, whether or not related to diplomacy. This month, we welcome to Deadline longtime diplomacy fan David E. Cohen to talk about his commitments to variants, spring gardening, and terriers.
I play dress up during the week, so I don't want to play dress up on the weekend. Sorry, David.
Well, luckily, all of that you just said is on camera. So hopefully
yes,
you'll get some people questioning why you're talking about dress up at all. But hey, David Cohen, welcome to Deadline.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, to start off with, tell us a little bit about how you got into the diplomacy hobby, if you would.
All right. Well, I heard about diplomacy when I was in high school. That was in the late 70s. I did not have anybody to play with, didn't know where to buy the game. And then in the fall of 1980, I went to college, and lo and behold, there was a games club. And they had a game of diplomacy going almost every week. And I got hooked, and I've stayed hooked.
Well, I can understand why. What has kept you hooked for so long?
Well, I mean, there's the game, which, in my humble opinion, I'm really good at. But in addition to the game, I've grown to really enjoy the interactions with the people outside of the game as well. Both in I guess game related work, helping run tournaments or run forums, and writing articles and so forth, designing variants, and just sort of interaction with people from all over the world, from all walks of life, that I would, I don't think I'm ever going to meet most of them, but I would gladly call them friends.
Yeah, that's really one of the wonderful things about our hobby, is the ability to make those connections over time and space, really.
Yes, agreed.
All right. Well, one thing you're particularly known for is variant design and development, I would say. So why variant?
Well, it tickles some of my interests. I've always had an interest in history, cartography, and over the years, as I played diplomacy, certainly I've come to know the shortfalls of the standard board, the standard map. It's very stalemate prone, and it's restrictive. So, I design variants that I like to play, that I would like to play. It's the style of map that I like. It gives me the opportunity to play without people always knowing all of the standard openings. Like you must always open to the Black Sea if you're Turkey, or, you have to protect Galicia if you're Austria. If it's a new variant, it's all fresh.
Well, to follow up on that, are there any particular aspects of variant design or game mechanics or board mechanics or something you've already that are particularly interesting to you? You've already, I think, said you don't really like stalemate positions or stalemate lines.
Right. Well, the variants that I've designed, they either have no stalemate lines or stalemate lines figure in a lot less centrally to play than they do in standard. A lot of the mechanics that I use, for instance, chaos builds you could build in any owned center. That helps alleviate stalemate lines. I generally don't have impassable areas in the middle of the board, a la Switzerland. I've worked on a mechanic known as, it's either step provinces if it's on land, or high seas provinces if it's on the water, which effectively stacks provinces so that players have access to a far greater number of provinces than they would ordinarily if they had a unit in one area. And that all makes for more fluid play, and it's harder to set up stalemate lines.
And you believe that achieves a better result than even Classic does in that sense?
Well, it's more likely that you'll get a winner. You don't get sort of bogged down attempting to negotiate your way past a stalemate line, nor are you generally stuck with people who feel like they rush to the stalemate line, dig in, and feel like they've achieved something, and then you can't do anything because they're unwilling to negotiate, or and they've got this position that you can't get around, and there's nothing you can do about it. I also typically, most of my variants are odd numbers of centers, or they have prime numbers of centers. So it makes it difficult for people to, they can't engineer a two-way draw, or if there's a multiple player draw, it's going to be different numbers of centers. So, everybody can't have the exact same score. So everything is generally pushing toward, like I said, more fluid play, and then an outcome that's more likely to be a win rather than a draw. And that's the style that I like. I'm a swashbuckler by inclination. Although really I'm very conservative. I have to fight against that in order to become the pirate that I want to be. Yeah, like I said, I design variants.
We all have goals in life, David. We all have goals in life. I'm glad to know what yours is now.
Exactly. I want to raise the Jolly Roger.
Is there a particular David E. Cohen design variant that you are proud of, specifically proud of, that you want to talk about?
Why don't you ask me which of my children is my favorite? I like them all. I know, and I can't tell you that.
Favorite. I want you to pick a favorite, make the rest of them feel inferior. That's what I'm looking for you to do.
You're not going to get that out of me. I enjoy playing all of them. If I didn't, I wouldn't put them out there.
That's fair. Well, we're going to do an ancient Mediterranean variant event at DipCon this year, DixieCon, and also there's going to be a similar one at Carnage. Have you had much experience in face-to-face variant play at either house games or conventions?
Well, I haven't since college. I've not played face-to-face. I mean, I cut my teeth on face-to-face in college for 4 years, but after that, it was law school and marriage, and I was away from the hobby for a decade, and then I rediscovered it on the internet, and it's been internet only for me ever since. There was very little variant play in college, and it's very tough to have people play variants face to face because everybody's got to be familiar with it. You have to have a board. I understood that before COVID, when Bangkok was going to host the WDC, they were going to be playing my Spice Islands variant, which includes Thailand as a power. And it's been rescheduled in Bangkok. I'm not sure whether they're going to play it. I think they are, but I don't know
I believe they are, David. I believe they are planning to play Spice Islands.
So that's good. They should know, by the way, that Ternate is overpowered, and they should work to contain Ternate. A little advanced advice there. People tend to ignore it, and then it has an insane win rate if you ignore it. So, I mean, it's sort of like France or Russia. You ignore them at your peril.
Well, everybody's got their opinions about that, but now we have the opinion of the actual game designer to unfairly influence the play. So thank you for that, David.
Exactly. No problem.
All right. Tell us a little bit. I meant to do this earlier. Tell us a little bit about what you have done in your life other than diplomacy and where you live, generally speaking.
All right. Well, I live on Long Island in New York. I've been an attorney for, I guess 35 years now. It's a long time. And not really a remarkable life other than that. I have 3 kids and a wife who puts up with me. I have the occasional other hobby. I watch various sports teams. I like to garden occasionally.
Well, let's talk about the gardening. Let's talk about the gardening because it is early April as we record this interview. And I would say the extent of my experience about the spring season is that I know that April showers bring May flowers, but I think maybe you have a more nuanced understanding of spring gardening. So what are your plans for 2023?
It's still the frozen north up here. There was frost 2 days ago, but everything is just about to open up. I have not been given my marching orders yet from the boss, the better half, so I'm not quite sure what I'm going to be doing for individual flower beds and so forth. I do know that I'm going to be doing some tree trimming, which fills me with dread as I am afraid of heights, but I got to get it done. So I will ignore the reptile.
Spring has sprung.
I will ignore. I'm going to ignore my reptile brain screaming at me that I'm going to die, which is what I do every time I climb up the ladder. So.
Well, I can tell that a lawyer is talking because you're talking about the reptile theory. So let's not get off on that particular litigation tangent, but instead talk about another thing that's happening right now as we are taping this interview, which is the Frozen Four begins a few days from now. And I believe you have a connection to one of those college hockey teams.
Yes. My alma mater is Boston University. They are in the Frozen Four. They are unfortunately going up against the top seed Minnesota. So I'm always hopeful, but I'm not terribly optimistic right now. But we'll see. We'll see.
Well, haven't your Terriers been sort of a powerhouse over the years, though, in general?
Yes, they're an elite hockey program. They've won 5 national championships. They're in the NCAAs on a regular basis. So they haven't won since 2009. So to me, they're overdue. So we'll see. It's in today is the 2nd. I believe the game is on the 5th. So I will know in a few days.
And by the time folks see this interview, they will either be able to congratulate you or make fun of you, depending on how BU does.
They make fun of me no matter what, but they can also congratulate me.
That's fair. Well, it's also another season, i.e. baseball season. So I'm giving you your chance now to pitch your team here on Deadline.
Well, my team is the Yankees, and they probably have a good enough media machine that I don't need to plug them. But I'm fairly optimistic as long as they can get past the Astros, which they haven't been able to do for a few years. But if they can get past that one team, I'm very optimistic for them. The best team the money can buy, I hope.
Well, that's typically the way the Yankees operate. David, I want to give you a final chance here to say anything else you want to our Deadline audience about diplomacy or any other subject.
Sure. One thing that I want to push is dedication to the game. My pet peeve is people who just phone it in. if you're going to do that, don't bother to play. I would say play every game of diplomacy as if it is the last game of diplomacy you will ever play. Because I don't play that many games at once. In fact, I'm not playing any at the moment. But I want to play against the most dedicated and the most skillful opponents I can find. So don't phone it in.
All right. Well, that sounds like pretty good advice to me, David. Thanks so much for being on Deadline.
Thank you very much for having me.
And now for our feature presentation. About a month from the release date of this episode, I will host the 2023 North American Diplomacy Championships, DipCon, at the 37th Annual DixieCon Tournament in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. For our panel discussion, I thought it would be apropos to reminisce a little about DixieCon and DipCon with three past champions. Australia's Andrew Goff, DipCon winner in both 2009 and 2018, and a second-place finisher at the 2020 DixieCon. Chris Brand of British Columbia, winner of the DipCon 2016 in Chicago. And then Maryland's David Miller, winner of DixieCon in both 2018 and 2019. So, fellas, welcome to Deadline.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Goffy, let's start with you, Goffy. Give us your diplomacy origin story, and then tell us why you like face-to-face diplomacy tournaments so much.
Well, it's tempting to say I was bitten by a spider, but the truth is probably very similar to most people, which is I played it in school with a group of friends, and the moment that I fell in love with it was when I first went to a convention and played in a tournament. And then it went from being something fun you might do on a rainy day to being competitive but social. And I just fell in love with the entire scene. And I think that explains why I love face-to-face diplomacy events as well. And that goes from tiny little tournaments that people have in their back gardens all the way up to DipCons and World DipCons. It's still got that same amazing social feel to it that just makes it worth showing up every time.
Well, that's, I'm sure, something a lot of our people watching can identify with. Chris, tell us about how you got into the game and then how and why you first got into playing in tournaments.
Yeah, my dad actually owned the game. So my first experience of diplomacy was a 3-player game with my brother and my dad, which was absolutely terrible. But then, yeah, we used to play at lunchtime in school, like in the space of an hour with very short deadlines. And that was fun. And then played online a bit. And then when I came to Canada, somehow I discovered there was a face-to-face tournament happening down in White Rock that Mikey Hall organized. I think that was 2004, and I just showed up at that out of the blue. And yeah, as Goffy said, there's something about that tournament environment, or that, you know, getting together with a bunch of other people who love this game. And yeah, I did quite well at that tournament as well, which doesn't hurt. So yeah, I've been attending face-to-face tournaments ever since, basically, as many as I can. So.
Well, it's good to see you there. David, you won 2 DixieCons in a row, which is hard to do. Give us your dip background, first of all, and then tell us, what was it like to win the same event in successive years?
Thanks, guys. Yeah, it's I think of a slightly different background. I went to the University of Maryland and I raced triathlon with Chris Martin, who many of you may know. And he was getting his PhD, and very occasionally he would say, "Hey, I'm playing this game. You should come play." And for years I said, "No, thank you." And then I guess one day I was feeling bad about myself, and I said yes. And so I went to play a game with Peter Jurgen and Chris Martin, and it was fun. It was really nice to meet the people and the PTKS folks. And then I went down to my very first tournament, which was DixieCon, where Chris Martin and Peter Jurgen both proceeded to solo on me. So, I guess my number one tip for winning would be to recruit people who don't know how to play, and then you can take them to a tournament and solo on them.
That is high strategy. That is high strategy from Jurgen and Martin, but keep going.
Yeah. And so, you know, winning DixieCon, it holds a very special place in my heart because it was my very first tournament. I met a lot of lifelong friends there. Everyone at DixieCon is extremely welcoming. I met Goffy there. And it was a great feeling, and it was really cool. But winning is great, and everyone in this chat in this room, I think, knows that. But really, the thing that I remember the most are the people I played those games with. You get a drink after, you get dinner after, you have barbecue, and just those memories of meeting people and bonding with people. And it's been 4 years since I've been to DixieCon for a variety of reasons with COVID. And so I'm really, really excited to go back this year and see everybody again.
Well, let me stay with you and ask you, if you do care about winning, and some of us do, what particular skills do you think are critical for diplomacy players to develop if they want to do well at a face-to-face event?
Yeah, and I do care about winning. Don't get me wrong. I won't start the diploming now for a couple weeks from now. There's 3 things I think you really need. Number one is to be able to see and understand the board. And it's not just tactics, but it's seeing how things are going to develop and what's going to happen 3 turns from now. What is Russia over there about to kill Turkey, and I need to get ready because they're going to be over the stalemate line. Things like that, so you can plan and start to set up conversations with people for things are probably going to happen. Number 2, I think you need to understand the motivations of the people you're playing with. I've been on boards where there's someone, their motivation is to maximize their score. I've been on a board with another person, their motivation is, I've never finished a game in a draw, and that's what I want to do. Or I want to do something crazy and fun and make this crazy convoy. And learning how to work with all of those motivations, understand that they're all valid motivations. Not everyone has to have the same motivation as you, and then work to achieve a game state where all the people you're working with get what they're looking for. Either that's, if that's a maximized score, I've had tournaments where I've taken a lesser score to maximize somebody else's score, and that's led me to win the tournament. So really taking that approach. And then number 3, making friends. If you go to a tournament and your only goal is to win, I think that's great. But I also think that making friends with people, developing relationships over the years are going to make you a more successful player. I played with, someone in 2015. They had a great time with me. When they show up to that board with me a few years later, even if they're not thinking about it, it impacts negotiations and it impacts how the game is going to go. So just making sure that you're there for the social aspect as well is important.
Fair. Andrew, you have played in events like this really all over the world. One of your 3 World DipCon titles came in Australia, and then the other 2 came in combined DipCon, World DipCon events in the States. So would you say there are significant differences among the various regional hobbies in terms of tournament play itself?
Absolutely. And I know Europe has so far evaded me, and some of that is just because of the huge differences all over the world. European games tend to be much shorter, much sharper games, more tactical. You tend to know when the game is going to finish. So the last few years are just everyone stabbing everyone. And I'm not averse to a stab, but I can't keep up with that nonsense. I'm getting old. I can't keep up with the Europeans who tactically are superb. And you compare that to a lot of United States diplomacy is very influenced by sort of what David was saying. Are you having fun at the event? It's not even what happens next year. If you look like you're grumpy, or if you look like the only thing you care about is winning, you tend not to do so well in the United States. If you're being social, if you're having fun, if you're fun to play with, then that goes a long way to being successful in the US hobby. Having said that, the differences between a tournament in Chicago and a tournament in California and DixieCon, they're almost like they're different countries. So one rule does not fit all. And of course, Australia, you win a tournament if you can beat Peter McNamara. So whatever you can do, if you figure that out, let me know, because we're all sick of him winning as well.
Well, I will second the concept that California is about like a different country. I will second that concept. Chris, let me go to you. You, of course, have played with some of the best players in the world in addition to yourself. What are some lessons that you can say that you may have learned from your opponents on a diplomacy board?
Usually not to leave myself too vulnerable to them.
Fair.
Yeah, there's an optimum level of paranoia that you need, and it's not to be completely paranoid, but it's not to be completely not paranoid either. I think David gave an extremely good answer to about how to play diplomacy, basically in tournaments in particular. What have I learned from my opponents? I guess one important thing is it never hurts to ask. This actually, I'm thinking in particular of a world tournament that I played on a board with Goffey, and I think this was the last round before the top board, and I said to him, we were in an alliance that had been doing quite well, England, France, I think, and I said to him, look, if you throw me one dot here, then I think I make the top board, and you're not in the running for the top board. So would you be willing to throw me one dot? And this was clearly a very big, like I could see on his face straight away, this was a very big ask for Goffey. And in fact, he even said to me, I don't do that. And then he thought about it a bit more, and in the end, he did throw me that one dot, and I did get onto the top board, and then I got totally annihilated on the top board. But it never hurts to ask, because they might say yes. Who knows, right?
Well, he did his part, Chris. Then it was up to you to do your part. But apparently,
I realized that.
Okay.
I needed a bit more practice on top boards at Worlds at that point. But
well, let me follow up with you, Chris, on the issue of tournament environment. Since you run an event yourself in British Columbia, what we all know it as Cascadia, what aspects of a diplomacy con do you find to be the most important in terms of the overall enjoyment for the participants?
One of the things that Andrew said is about trying to make it fun for the players. That's my goal as a TD, is to have people come and go away saying, yeah, I had a good time. Whether if they won, they probably had a good time. That's fine. It's the people who didn't win, or who had three terrible boards, that you want to go away still going, well, I didn't play very good diplomacy, or I didn't get very good results, but I really enjoyed myself anyway. So I try and make sure that Cascadia is very approachable for newer players, people who maybe are dipping their toes in to see, well, do I actually want to play one of these events? Do I want to spend a whole weekend playing diplomacy or not? We have a social event on the Friday night before we start playing any diplomacy. I try and make sure that I explain everything. After you've been playing tournaments for a while, there's a lot of stuff that you just know about how tournaments work. But if you're first time at a tournament, I remember being totally out of my depth, not having a clue what was going on. So I try and have that mindset in the back of my mind and make sure that that new person who we haven't seen before is not going to be surprised by anything that happens during the weekend. On the board, sure, but outside of on the board, they shouldn't be surprised by anything. Just try and make sure people have a good time and facilitate those social interactions and the making friends, because ultimately the reason people come back to tournaments is because they've made friends and their friends are going to be there.
Amen to that. David, you've been to a number of different tournaments. Give me some examples, a handful of places or events you've been to. Give us some examples of some aspects of the convention that stand out to you, or any particular memories that stand out to you.
Yeah, I'll start with DixieCon because that's coming up. It is the most welcoming tournament that I've been to. Even if you don't play, if you show up, you play one board of diplomacy and you decide that's not for me, there's tons of other stuff to do. There's people playing the Iron Man gaming tournament. If you're an outdoorsy person, the weather's usually pretty nice. You can do things. There's good food. It's just an overall good time. And I think the culture at DixieCon is very inclusive. The structure of the scoring system being draw-based, where you and I can be in an alliance together and you can have a better score than me and I can still win the tournament, right? It's not a tournament destroying score because we're in a three-way draw together, right? It's a type of diplomacy that I think is very good for beginners. I'll talk about Carnage on the Mountain up in Vermont. I think that's my second most beginner-friendly tournament, I would say. Again, it's a gaming convention with other games. So a friend of mine came with me. He didn't play any diplomacy at all, but he hung out with the diplomacy folks. He got to play some other stuff. He'll be at DixieCon this year. Dave Miletsky, who runs that event, another David, he does a great job, and he's very welcoming to other people. Make sure that there are things to do and that newbies aren't, off on their own alone, which is, I think, something that a lot of us are worried about when we go to our first tournament. Other events I've been to, Whipping in California, a little more, I would say, Care Bear brand of play style out there. I noticed there wasn't as much stabbing as I've seen in some other tournaments, so that's a great tournament for newer people. The West Coast crowd is characteristically more laid back. They're big go out at night people, I found. So if you're a night owl and like to go out and have a good time after the tournament, that's a great tournament for you. And I think they're still giving out teddy bears as prizes, which if that's not a big draw, I don't know what is. And then I would say Cascadia, which is run by Chris. I went to my first Cascadia earlier this year. Chris and Riaz, who helps Chris out and helps make sure everyone's welcome. They put on a great show. I really saw in that tournament one of my favorite things about diplomacy, which is I like to call adopt a newbie. If you're an experienced player who knows a lot of people and you see someone who's new and they look lost, I don't care if it's in the game, outside of the game, at breakfast, just go say hi to them and invite them out to whatever everyone else is doing. That's the number one thing that's going to make someone have a good time, no matter how they do in diplomacy. It's what keeps me coming back. I could be very last place at DixieCon, and I know I'm gonna have a great time because I'm gonna see a whole bunch of my friends. So yeah, all the North American tournaments I think are great. I haven't been to Weasel Moot in Chicago. That's on my list, but they keep holding it on weekends where I'm away. So if you guys can reschedule, I'll see you this year. And I've heard that tournament's a little bit more cutthroat. Tempest was a little cutthroat when we were running it. Hopefully we'll get that back up and running in the next few years. But it's a great schedule.
That's a good report on the diplomacy circuit. Goffey, the North American DipCon, to come back to that for a minute, it's a combination really between a competitive championship event on the one hand and a gathering of diplomacy fans or friends really on the other hand. So do you think there's any tension between those two goals? And if so, how do we resolve it?
I think for some people there is, but I think if you look at the people who win these tournaments, there isn't. I think it goes back to David's point that if you're being social and making friends, then people are more likely going to work with you. But it's also my point that if you're the guy who shows up to a diplomacy tournament with sort of grumpy, I'm going to win, people see that coming and they go, oh, no, you're not going to win. Sorry, we're going to put an end to that nonsense. And I guess it also ties into David's point. Be nice to the new players. Just because it's a DipCon, the way to win isn't necessarily just to straight up say, oh, I haven't met this person before, I'm going to kill them. Usually you find that the really big games that can win big tournaments like a DipCon are the ones where unexpected alliances happen. And I would say that's been not only how I've won some tournaments, but also how I've made some amazing friends over the years. So for me, you start out from a point where there should be that tension, but you work around to a point where actually the two just work together. And if you can learn to embrace that and instead of sort of seeing them competing as complementing each other, then I think that it makes you enjoy the playing, but it also makes you a better player.
That makes sense. You yourself have been to DixieCon physically a couple of times in addition to coming virtually in the 2020 event. Do you have a particular memory or aspect of DixieCon that you want to share, Andrew?
I have happy and sad memories. I'm still a little bit sore that I only finished second at the virtual one. I would very much, like David, like to win DixieCon one day. It's a very prestigious tournament. But my memories, I'm from Australia. I don't know if you've noticed, that's a long way away from Southern barbecue. And honestly, I had never had Southern barbecue done properly before. And that social part of DixieCon, I still can't describe what I ate. And that's in a good way, by the way, just to be clear. That there's nothing like that in Australia. We have a totally different concept of barbecue. So I've rocked up there thinking I'm going to have a sausage and a piece of bread. It was so much more, and the social stuff going on around it, the way people get together at DixieCon is, I think it's a very special tournament just because of that social scene that you've built over years and years. And that's a lot of that is up to you, David. I think you champion that, and it shows.
Andrew, I wish you could come this year. You could really enjoy the barbecue if you could come this year.
I haven't said I'm not coming yet.
It's true. Chris, to get away from DixieCon just a minute, we all know you've been to DixieCon because we've read about it in the Grantland article from 2014. But let's change that subject, though, and talk about DipCons and World DipCons, because you have been to multiple events like that in many locations. What are your feelings about those two things as institutions, the DipCon for North American Championship and the World DipCon for the World Championship?
Yeah, I mean, I said when I first attended a tournament in 2004. My first Worlds was in 2007 when it happened to be in Vancouver, which was very convenient. I have been to every Worlds except one since then, because I just had such a good time having so many diplomacy players in one place, and the way that it's just a different feel, a different scale to other tournaments. So since, I mean, my rule these days is I will go to the West Coast tournaments because they're fairly cheap and easy to get to. Whipping is awesome as well. And if they ever have anything in Portland or Seattle, those are very easy for me. My next choices are Worlds, because Worlds is something special. And then after that, if I can make another tournament, then it will usually be DipCon, because again, it's not the same scale as Worlds, but it's the next best thing. It's a big tournament. Lots of people are going to be there. Good quality play, and all my friends will be there. I mean, maybe not all.
I think it's probably worth saying that when World DipCon started in 1988, it was specifically patterned after how DipCon had been going since 1970, in the sense of having a championship that rotated among host regions or host tournaments. So that was the point of it. So it makes sense that they fulfill a similar role.
Yeah, I see them as very, very similar in a lot of ways. And I mean, one of the things is Worlds can be a little more one-offy. Someone might organize a tournament that is just Worlds, and there's not been what's coming up in Thailand, right? We've never had a tournament. There has been a tournament in Thailand, but Thailand is something special. DipCon, in my experience, has always been an established tournament that's been running for several years. And for me, it's like, it's my chance to sample those tournaments, to go and try Weaselmoot or DixieCon or wherever it happens to be this year, because otherwise the East Coast tournaments are a little bit hard to get to for me. I feel bad saying that with Andrew here, who I know travels to all these tournaments, and it's way harder for him. But
well, some people have commitments.
Yeah,
and then others. David, you're our resident DixieCon expert here. Tell us, what about DixieCon allows you to win twice?
It's the very generous allies that I've had. No, it's really. I kind of want to just tell the story of my first tournament, and then I think that'll answer the question. So I show up to this tournament. I know 2 or 3 people, only one person pretty well, and I'm just kind of thrown into it. First board, Chris Martin solos because there was a child who was playing who wanted to go play with his brother, and Chris Martin said, if you walk out of your dots, you can go play with your brother sooner. And the kid, and this is so I learned that game, understanding motivations. Got it. And then the next game I played with Peter Jurgen, and I was Russia, he was Turkey. He soloed, I ended on 12 dots, and I don't think I moved a piece towards him a single time. And in that game I learned, oh, there's a thing called tactics, and I know nothing about it. I better work on that. And then in the third game, it's actually my first game ever with Goffey. We had 7 players on the board, and the kid was playing again, and Goffey talked to the kid, and I don't think he had a very fun tournament because I think a lot of people just dismissed that a child was playing. I think he was 12, and he wasn't a competitive player like many of the other people were. And Goffey, it looked like magic to me. Somehow we ended the game on a 7-way draw. No one was over 5 centers, and Goffey single-handedly had locked up the entire board so that the kid could be in a draw and get to have a short game and a successful game. And after having this very strange, varied experience and all the fun with everybody playing games and having barbecue, I was hooked. And to win, I really kind of took those lessons I learned in my first tournament are kind of what motivates me now. It's you need to know tactics and you need to be good at the game to win. You need to understand other people's motivations so that you can work with those to both of your advantage. And you need to understand the game is about everybody there having fun. And so those 3 things that I learned in my first tournament where I got my behind kicked are, I think, what allowed me to win and is the template for anyone who wants to win at DixieCon. You know, weird things happen. I had a 2-way draw voted when there were 4 people on a board, right? And a lot of people told me after that, like, your win is meaningless and is stupid because, you know, your friends just gave you, you know, a victory. And I said, well, I developed relationships with those people over the course of years in the tournament. I gave dots away on that board to people to satisfy what they wanted. And, you know, I actually find the result of that game to be more satisfying than a solo that you force with pieces, because diplomacy to me is not moving blocks and dots, it's working with people. So I think at DixieCon, if you're coming this year and you want to win, learn and figure out how to work with the people. And then, you know, the secondary part is know how to push the blocks around.
I appreciate that memory. Chris, let's go to final thoughts from you for our audience about DixieCon or DipCon or any other subject.
Yeah, I don't think I want to talk about my experience at DipCon, at DixieCon. For the record, my one board there was supposed to be a nice 2-way draw and was in fact a solo for the other person, who I then discovered I was sharing a room with, and he then went on to win the tournament and the World Championship. So that was my. But I remember the barbecues.
Good. David, how about you? Final thoughts.
Just if you haven't signed up for, even if you live in Australia, please come to DixieCon this year. I would love to see you there, share some barbecue with you, buy you a beer afterwards. It's a great place. And if you're listening to this and you haven't gone to a tournament or you're unsure about it, just go. Talk to people. You're going to have a good time. It's a very, very welcoming group. And I think the best thing for the hobby is just to have more new people coming so that we can keep having these great events.
All right. Thank you very much, David. Andrew, take us home here. Final thoughts.
I want to echo what Chris said. When a new calendar comes out, the events I look for are DipCon, World DipCon, and also the European Championships. And there's 2 reasons for that. The first one, just totally echoing what Chris said, it's an amazing experience. The next level, and that's socially and for play. But the other thing is, if you want to get really good, David's experience is spot on. You show up to a DipCon, you show up to a big tournament, and you learn so much. You get so much better, so much faster than if you're just playing house games or playing online. So as well as everything we've said, if you want to get good and do it quickly, showing up to DipCons, it's the trick. Show up. And I can almost promise you, with David running things, it's going to be a really good time, whether you get 3 18s or 3 quick eliminations. DixieCon is just a great tournament to be hosting DipCon.
All right, Andrew, thank you. Chris, thank you. David, thank you. Thanks to you guys for being on the show. Thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixiecon.com. To review all of our broadcast offerings, visit our website at diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.